the secret star code behind the story of Sleeping Beauty. Introduction. More than a fairy tale, have you ever wondered why the story of Sleeping Beauty has survived for hundreds of years? Why does this specific narrative about a princess who sleeps for 100 years continue to fascinate people of all ages around the world? The answer may be hidden in the stars. The story we know today as Sleeping Beauty is not just a simple fairy tale created to entertain children. Behind this seemingly simple narrative lies a secret code based on celestial movements, the cycles of nature, and the ancestral wisdom that our forebears encoded in stories to preserve important knowledge. When we look more deeply at the elements of the story, the sleeping princess, the spindle that wounds her, the 100 years of sleep, the awakening with a kiss, we discover that each detail corresponds to real astronomical phenomena our ancestors observed in the night sky. The stellar origins of the story. The princess constellation. The first clue to the stellar code lies in the sleeping princess herself. She represents the constellation Andromeda, one of the oldest constellations known to humanity in Greek mythology. Andromeda was a princess who was chained to a rock as a sacrifice to a sea monster, but was saved by the hero Perseus. The Andromeda constellation has a very special characteristic. During certain times of the year, it seems to fall asleep on the horizon, becoming almost invisible to observers at certain latitudes. This sleep of the constellation lasts approximately 3 months, a period that, symbolically, was expanded to 100 years in the fairy tale version. Ancient astronomers noticed that when Andromeda slept on the horizon, other important constellations also shifted positions, creating a celestial cycle that repeated year after year. This observation was fundamental for the development of calendars and for agriculture. The spindle and distaff of the three fates. The spindle that wounds the princess in the tale represents something much deeper than a simple sewing tool. In ancient astronomy, the cosmic spindle represented the Earth's axis, the imaginary line around which our planet rotates. The three fairies in the story, sometimes called the Fates, correspond to the three main stars in the constellation, Orion, Alnitak, Aunalim, and Mintaka, known as the Three Marys or Orion's Belt. These stars were fundamental for navigation and for marking the seasons of the year. The thread they weave represents the ecliptic, the apparent path the sun travels over the course of the year. When the princess pricks herself on the spindle, it symbolically represents the moment when the sun reaches a specific point on the ecliptic, marking the beginning of winter or a period of dormancy in nature. The 100 years of sleep, the code of time, celestial and terrestrial cycles. The 100 years of sleep were not chosen at random. This number represents several important astronomical cycles observed by our ancestors. The cycle of Saturn, the most distant planet visible to the naked eye, takes approximately 29.5 years to complete an orbit around the Sun. In 100 years, Saturn completes almost exactly 3.5 orbits. For the ancients, this represented 3 complete eras of wisdom and transformation. The precession of the equinoxes. The Earth has a very slow motion called precession, which causes the position of the stars to change gradually over the centuries. In 100 years, this change is noticeable to careful observers, representing an awakening into a new astronomical era. Comet cycles. Many comets have orbital periods close to 100 years. The most famous is Halley's Comet, which appears every 76 years. To the ancients, the return of a comet was seen as the awakening of a celestial spirit. The hidden mathematics in the tales. The numbers in the Sleeping Beauty tale follow mathematical proportions found in nature and astronomy. 13 invited fairies correspond to the 13 lunar cycles in a solar year. One forgotten fairy represents the extra day needed to reconcile the lunar calendar with the solar. 3 gifts from the first fairies, the 3 basic motions of the Earth: rotation, revolution, and precession. 100 years of sleep. The complete cycle of celestial renewal. 1 kiss to awaken. The exact moment of astronomical alignment. The sleeping castle. A star map, celestial architecture. The castle where the princess sleeps is not just a fantastic setting. Its description corresponds precisely to how ancient astronomers organized their observations of the night sky. The castle towers represent the principal circumpolar constellations, those that never set and remain visible in the night sky of the northern hemisphere. These constellations, Ursa Major, Ursa Minor, Cassiopeia, Draco, form the towers of a celestial castle. The sleeping gardens correspond to the zodiacal constellations, which sleep during the day and awaken at night, changing position according to the seasons. The thorny wall represents the Milky Way, which encircles the entire night sky like a great luminous wall. The thorns are the denser regions of stars that make it harder to observe more distant objects. Time frozen in the castle. One of the most striking features of the tale is that time seems to stop inside the castle. This reflects a real astronomical concept, sidereal time. To an observer on Earth, the stars appear to move from east to west during the night, but if we could observe from a fixed point in space, we would see that the stars keep constant relative positions. The castle's frozen time represents this cosmic perspective, where terrestrial cycles are mere minor details within a great celestial clock. The awakening prince, the sun and the planets, the solar journey. The prince who awakens the princess represents the sun in its annual cycle. His journey to the castle symbolizes the sun's apparent movement through the constellations of the zodiac. The forest of thorns represents the winter constellations, when the sun seems weaker and more distant. The prince must fight through these constellations to reach spring, the 100 years of waiting. The time different civilizations took to fully understand solar and planetary cycles. Each generation added a little more knowledge until they could finally awaken the complete secret of the heavens. The awakening kiss represents the moment of the vernal equinox, when the sun kisses the celestial equator, and the days begin to grow longer than the nights in the northern hemisphere. The prince's companions in older versions of the tale. The prince sometimes travels with companions. These represent the visible planets that accompany the sun on its annual journey. Mercury, the swift messenger who goes ahead. Venus, the morning and evening star that heralds the sun. Mars, the red warrior who protects the retinue. Jupiter, the wise counselor who guides the way. Saturn, the elder who brings ancestral wisdom. Encoded wisdom. Why hide the knowledge? Preservation across generations. The ancients had good reasons to encode astronomical knowledge in fairy tales. Ease of memorization. Stories are much easier to remember than mathematical formulas or astronomical tables. A child who learns the tale of Sleeping Beauty is, unknowingly, memorizing information about celestial cycles. Resistance to censorship. During periods of religious or political persecution, scientific knowledge could be dangerous. Disguised as children's tales, these teachings survived when scientific texts were burned. Cultural transmission. Stories cross linguistic and cultural barriers more easily than technical treatises. Sleeping Beauty exists in hundreds of variations around the world, each preserving elements of the original code. The universal language of symbols. The stellar code uses a symbolic language that works in any culture. Sleeping, waking, cycles of disappearance and reappearance in the sky, specific numbers, orbital periods and astronomical cycles, colors, different types of stars and planets, animals, specific constellations, everyday objects, instruments of astronomical observation. Modern discoveries that confirm the code. Archaeoastronomy. Recent archaeological discoveries confirm that ancient civilizations truly encoded astronomical knowledge in their stories and monuments. Stonehenge. This prehistoric monument is essentially a stone computer that calculates celestial cycles. Its construction shows that the ancients had far more sophisticated astronomical knowledge than we imagined. Egyptian pyramids, precisely aligned with specific constellations. They preserve in stone the same knowledge encoded in Sleeping Beauty. Ancient calendars. The Maya calendar, the Chinese calendar, and other ancient systems of timekeeping incorporate the same celestial cycles found in the fairy tale code. Modern astronomy. Modern telescopes have confirmed many observations our ancestors made with the naked eye. Solar activity cycles. The sun indeed has cycles of approximately 11 years, and larger cycles of about 100 years, confirming the wisdom encoded in the tale. Movement of the constellations. Earth's precession truly causes the constellations to change position over the centuries, exactly as symbolically described in the Princess's Awakening. Distant planets. The discovery of planets beyond Saturn confirmed that the solar system is even more complex than the ancients imagined, validating their intuition that there were more celestial secrets to discover. Practical applications of the star code, navigation, and agriculture. The knowledge encoded in Sleeping Beauty had important practical applications. Maritime navigation. Sailors who knew the stories of the stars could navigate using the constellations, even without modern instruments. Agricultural calendar. Farmers who understood celestial cycles knew exactly when to plant, harvest, and store seeds. Weather forecasting. Certain planetary alignments do correspond to climatic patterns, allowing for long-term meteorological forecasts. Ancestral medicine, star medicine, astromedicine used astronomical knowledge for treatments, circadian rhythms. The ancients already knew that the human body follows cycles related to celestial movements. Lunar influence. The moon truly affects tides, plant growth, and some human biological processes. Seasons and health. Different times of the year favor different types of treatments and healthcare. The secret code revealed. Decoding the complete story. Now that we understand the individual elements, we can decode the entire story as an astronomical map. The complete sequence of events, the princess's birth, represents the beginning of a new celestial cycle, when an important constellation rises on the eastern horizon. The christening and the gifts. The fairies bestowing gifts symbolize different planets aligning with the constellation, each blessing the new cycle with its specific influences. The forgotten fairy represents an unexpected astronomical element, perhaps a comet, an eclipse, or another rare celestial event that was not predicted. The curse. The moment when the constellation begins moving toward the western horizon, starting its phase of decline. The attempt at protection represents the efforts of ancient astronomers to compensate for or correct their celestial predictions. The spindle wound, the exact moment of a specific alignment, perhaps when the constellation crosses the meridian or reaches a particular point relative to other stars. The 100-year sleep, the period during which the constellation remains asleep below the horizon or in a specific position. The sleeping castle, the entire night sky frozen in this particular configuration, awaiting the next great alignment. The princess arrival, the sun or another celestial body, entering the correct position to awaken the new cycle. The awakening, the exact moment when the celestial configuration changes and a new astronomical cycle begins. The hidden instruction manual, the complete story works as an instruction manual for sky watchers, how to identify the start of a cycle, look for specific configurations of constellations and planets, how to calculate durations, use the numbers encoded in the story, 100 years, 13 fairies, etc., as the basis for calculations, how to predict future events, understand that cycles repeat, and by knowing one you can predict the next, how to transmit the knowledge, tell the story exactly as you received it, preserving all symbolic details. Other stories with similar codes, astronomical fairy tales. Sleeping Beauty is not alone. Many other traditional tales contain similar astronomical codes. Cinderella, the transformation at midnight represents the change of constellations at the midpoint of the night. The glass slipper symbolizes the new moon, and the ugly stepsisters represent the waning lunar phases. Jack and the beanstalk that grows to the sky represents the Milky Way, and Jack's journey symbolizes an imaginary voyage through the constellations. The Three Little Pigs. The three houses represent 3 stages of astronomical observation: casual observation straw, systematic observation wood, and scientific observation brick. Little Red Riding Hood. The journey through the forest symbolizes the movement of the planet Mars, read through shadowy constellations during its orbit. World mythologies. Cultures around the world developed similar systems. Greek mythology. The stories of heroes and gods correspond directly to constellations and their movements. Chinese astronomy. The Chinese zodiac encodes planetary cycles in animal stories. Norse traditions. Viking sagas contain star maps for navigation in the Arctic Ocean. Indigenous Americas. Oral traditions preserve knowledge about eclipses, comets, and other celestial events. Implications for our understanding of history. Reassessing ancient civilizations. The discovery of these stellar codes forces us to rethink our understanding of ancient civilizations. Level of scientific knowledge. Our ancestors had far more advanced astronomical knowledge than we usually recognize. Methods of preservation. They developed sophisticated systems to preserve and transmit knowledge across generations. International cooperation. Many similar stories in distant cultures suggest either knowledge exchange or independent discoveries of the same principles. The value of traditional tales. This discovery also changes our perspective on folklore. Scientific heritage. Fairy tales are not just entertainment, they are repositories of ancestral scientific knowledge. Holistic education. The ancients integrated science, art, and storytelling in ways our modern education could emulate. Cultural preservation. The importance of keeping oral traditions alive becomes even clearer when we understand their hidden scientific value. Conclusion. Awakening to a new understanding. The story of Sleeping Beauty is much more than a simple fairy tale. It is a sophisticated astronomical manual in disguise, a time capsule that preserved scientific knowledge through centuries of cultural and social change. Every element of the story, from the number of invited fairies to the exact duration of the princess's sleep, was carefully chosen to correspond to real astronomical phenomena. The tale functions simultaneously as entertainment, an educational tool, and a knowledge preservation system. This discovery teaches us several important lessons about ancestral wisdom. Our ancestors were far more scientifically sophisticated than we often assume. They developed creative and effective methods to preserve and transmit complex knowledge. About narrative, stories are powerful tools not only for entertainment but for education and cultural preservation. The blend of science and storytelling creates a form of knowledge that is both rigorous and memorable. About cultural continuity, the same skies our ancestors observed still stretch above our heads. By deciphering their encoded stories, we not only recover lost knowledge, but also reconnect with thousands of years of human observation and wisdom. About modern education, perhaps we should rethink how we teach science. Integrating narrative, art, and direct observation as the ancients did could make science education more effective and engaging. When you look at the night sky next time, remember that you are seeing the same stars that inspired the story of Sleeping Beauty. The constellations continue their eternal dance, following the same patterns our ancestors observed and encoded in their stories. The sleeping princess awakens not only through the prince's kiss, but through our renewed understanding of the secret code of the stars. And in that awakening, we discover that we are part of a tradition far older and wiser than we ever imagined. The true treasure is not the fairy tale happy ending, but the journey of discovery that leads us to understand our deep, ancestral connection with the cosmos. Sleeping Beauty has finally awakened, and with her, our appreciation for the genius of our forebears and the eternal beauty of the celestial dance that continues above our heads, night after night, century after century. And so, as in all good fairy tales, we discover that the end is only the beginning of a new adventure. This time, an adventure of rediscovering ancient wisdom and reconnecting with the cosmos, which has always been our true home.